Hello, everyone, and welcome to our August webinar on the magical power of open-ended questions. Julie Miller here today. My partner in crime, Jen Tankenow, is not with us today. She's actually on site with clients, so you are stuck here with me today, but I promise it's going to be super fun for us to be able to go through. I'm glad you guys all took a little bit out of your day today to come learn a little bit more about open-ended questions. Now, this is actually a presentation that I've given at the American Society of Quality World Conference, as well as ACMP, our American Change Management Professionals Organization, at their World Conference earlier this year as well. So consider yourselves lucky because all those people had to pay for that webinar. You guys get it for free here today, and you get to learn all of my secrets on open-ended questions. Now, you might be asking, where did these actually come from? Like, why is this revolutionary? It was super interesting for me to learn. A lot of these open-ended, ended questions came from my experience and training as a certified performance coach. And it was super interesting for me to learn how to rephrase some of those questions into more open-ended questions. It actually ended up softening the way that I was asking questions of people. So instead of asking, what were you thinking? Or why did you do it that way? It actually allowed me to rephrase those open-ended questions into better open-ended questions that would elicit more of a response, and one that did not see as confrontational in those cases. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that today as we go through. There's nothing super, I would say, complicated behind this. It's really just adjusting the way that we ask our questions of people and how we phrase them. It's super magical as we walk through this because you'll start to notice if you start using more open-ended questions and closed-ended questions, you're going to get a lot more information back. So a really fun way for us to be able to make a big impact in a short period of time. All right, so we're going to jump right in here today and just a little bit about Joint Pivot because I know we've got some new people who are on our webinar today. So welcome. We are glad to have you here with us. Jen Tankenow and I formed Joint Pivot just about 2 years ago, and we have been hitting the ground running ever since. We love working with different businesses who may not have the resources to be able to hire their own group who does what we do, or if they want a little bit more experience and they want us coming in to help train, or we are overflow where we can come in and help them with this as well. We use our training, our experience to make sure that we are helping you find the custom answers to the different issues that you are running into, whether that's related to problem solving, process improvement, strategic planning, project management, all of that fun stuff. My personal favorite, change management and leadership coaching, all really fun aspects of what we do. So we realized we love what we do more than who we do it for. So reach out to us if you need any help with this. We are happy to jump in. Nothing is too big or too small for us to kind of take a peek at. And there's surely a way that we can help you out in these cases. All right, so just to review, Jen and I are on here. Obviously, Jen's not here today, but you can see her smiley face here as the other half of Joint Pivot. And for me, my name is Julie Miller. I'm a certified Six Sigma Master Black Belt and a change management trainer for ProSci, change management trainer certified, I should say, as well as a IPEC certified coach. So just a little bit about me and why I love doing all of this stuff as well. So what we do, I mean, we do everything kind of running out there right now. I know it sounds kind of cliche, but there's a lot of stuff that we can offer in these cases. We love going out there and rolling our sleeves up, digging right into the project side by side with you. So whether that's going through doing some strategic planning sessions, doing some mapping sessions with you, creating some process maps, doing some project management work with you, helping set up programs, love doing that. We also love teaching. So I actually am in the middle today of straddling two teaching sessions on teaching some people some Lean 2.0. So some basic concepts of Lean. We're doing all of that virtually right now, or we can do that in person as well as things start to open up here, which we are also very excited about. So a big library or big catalog of things that we can teach as well, everywhere from process improvement, Lean Six Sigma, project management, change management, all of that fun stuff. And then last but not least, which I alluded to earlier, we love speaking as well. So if you need a guest speaker coming in, talking to your volunteer group or your organization, or you just want somebody to maybe pump up the team about process improvement and how this works in people's experiences, give us a call for that as well. We love talking about this stuff. One of my favorite things is sharing all this information with people at the big conferences like the ASQ conference and the ACMP conference that I had alluded to earlier. I love going to those conferences and meeting all the people who are learning more about this. I take away a ton from all of the other speakers in those conferences as well and learn from that experience. And I love sharing my experience with other people, even if I can help one person look at a process a little bit differently than they did the day before. So giving a little bit of a nugget of information, sometimes that can unlock a whole new world or a whole new level. And hopefully learning a little bit more about these open-ended questions will do that for you as well. So we have a couple learning objectives here today that we are going to be hitting up. And the first one is understanding what open-ended questions are and how we can craft those. Because there's really just one key difference, and it's that first word that you're going to be asking there. The second one is to go through and recognize how we use open-ended questions to really take the ownership away from us as the facilitators of these meetings and put it back onto the team that you're working with or your project team. Sometimes we get put in these positions as leaders where everybody is looking to us for the answers. And we built that team around us because of their skills and abilities. So we need to tap into that and get more information from them instead of us giving the answers or providing those answers in those cases. Open-ended questions can really help out us with that trick. Then we'll understand how to use those clear and direct open-ended questions to drive reflection. And I'll say in here, the best open-ended questions are the ones that cause people to stop and think about what that answer actually is. It forces them to just not like nod yes or no. It really helps them dig down deep to figure out what that goal is that they're going to be working with. And then last but not least, we're going to talk about what open-ended questions we ask during each phase of either a process improvement event or in change management. I've got a list at the very end here today that shows the open-ended questions I use in both of those situations. You can actually use both sets of questions in all of your different meetings as well. I love refreshing myself with these open-ended questions. If you know me, you know that I've got a laminated list of these that I keep tucked in my notebook that I use in all different circumstances to refresh myself about what those open-ended questions are before I go into meetings so they can be at the tip of my tongue and I can certainly be thinking about them as we are running through all of these different events that we get to run. Even if they're just one-on-one meetings, all the way through some big strategic planning sessions. They are useful across the board. So our key takeaways that we're going to be talking about here today are having a simple way that we're going to be able to ask these questions and get input from people that is impactful, number one, and actionable. That's going to give me good actionable information that you need to move forward. So what is the information that you need to pull out of people in order to make decisions, in order to do things better, and in order to improve the process? That really helps get more valuable participation. And you know those meetings that I'm talking about, those ones that you step in and everybody just seems to be on their A game and they're all talking and throwing in ideas and nobody's like pouting over in the corner. And you're like, how did that happen? And a lot of the times it's because of the facilitator asking the right questions and driving that conversation, making it a safe environment for people to think and to respond. Those open-ended questions really dig deep with people, helping them dig deep into their own experiences to give you the gold that we talk about to be able to walk away with. And the cool part is too, from a change management perspective, if they're the ones giving you the ideas on what it is that you need to change or what needs to be improved, then they own it. They have some accountability, some skin in the game then, and it's not your idea that you're walking away with, it's their idea that you're walking away with. So what pushed me to put together a webinar on this and why I thought it was super important for us to be able to share? Well, we all know that meetings don't happen like this process improvement checklist meeting, where you're a subject matter expert on the topic and you're asked to facilitate a meeting and you're like, sweet, I know everything about that. That doesn't happen very often. Where you're working with people who love change and love process and love those combined. It's not very often you find that either. Or you have people who all know the process who are present. You've got everybody there that you need to have there, and that there's no resistance. That doesn't happen either. There's usually a couple people in the room who are not super happy about what process you are going to be changing or what you're going to be talking about. And then last but not least, people are forthcoming with all information. Sometimes I feel like that information is tied up in Fort Knox, where you have to ask the questions in a certain pattern, and it has to be a certain phase of the moon on a certain day of the month, and only then will you get that information out of somebody. Hopefully, these open-ended questions will certainly help fix that issue because we know that process improvement checklist is essentially a unicorn. It does not exist. To be able to check off every single one of those boxes probably doesn't even need you in the first place. It can probably run on its own. We know as leaders who are running these types of events or people who are working on these continuous improvement events, we are brought in to help address these reasons because typically we are not checking any of these boxes off when we are going to be talking about process change. So that is where it falls on our shoulders to be able to drive that conversation correctly and ask the right questions to be able to move that group forward. So when we talk about open-ended questions versus closed-ended questions, it's a really simple way to look at it. Now, open-ended questions are those ones that we are talking about the do, or sorry, I've got these flipped around here. The closed-ended questions do, have, did, was, are, will, could, and can. That is anything that relates to yes or no answers. So if it's a yes or no answer, that is a closed-ended question. If it's an open-ended question, that's where we're going to be looking at the hows, the whens, the whos, the whys, the whats, the wheres, the ifs. Those are the ones that you can't answer with one word. So that's always my test. If you can answer the question with a yes or no, or white or black, or red or blue, whatever it is, that's a closed-ended question. If it is a question that you have to answer with a sentence or a couple more words, you have to elaborate on something, that is an open-ended question. So close-ended questions typically leave you with some sort of binary response. It's like, wah, wah. It's pretty sad in those cases when you ask a close-ended question. And the responses are either yes or no, pass or fail, or my dreaded response that I get back is that it depends. And when I hear that it depends, I want to run as far as I can the other direction. That is super frustrating, especially in a process improvement world, because you want standardized processes where you know what it is that you need to do next. It shouldn't be an it depends. You should be able to know what scenario you need to go to next based on the output from the previous process. So that can really bring a discussion to an abrupt halt. And we probably have all been in meetings before where the it depends has popped out and then it almost deflates the room. You can just hear the air being sucked out of it at that point. It's a really tough situation to be in. Now, on the contrast of that, open-ended questions are much more challenging. They're much more powerful. They're probing, clarity-seeking, thought-provoking. These are the questions that are really requiring people to elaborate a little bit more on the process. They shouldn't be easy to respond to. They should require people taking a good pause, reflecting, taking some time to think about it. And as facilitators, sometimes it can be super awkward when you ask an open-ended question and people need time to think about it because people have this need to fill the space, to fill that silence. Count to 5, count to 10, whatever it is. Allow people the time to just go through and think about, okay, what is it that I need to work on at this point? What should I answer? How do I want to phrase this? Give them the time and the space to thoughtfully think through the answers to that questions before they respond. You don't want to rush them. You don't want to try and fill the space. You want to give them a quiet period to be able to think. And it was funny yesterday, I was actually running an event and we asked a really good open-ended question. And the person paused and was thinking about what their answer was going to be. And somebody in the room just started talking because they didn't like the silence. And that person lost their train of thought. The person we had asked the question to, they lost what they were thinking about. And it took them about 15 minutes to remember what it was and come back and think about it in that situation and remember in those cases what it was they actually were trying to get across. So even if you are the participant in an event and somebody asks a really great open-ended question to somebody, resist the urge to fill that silence. Allow that person to go in and really think about what that response is going to be. All right. So some of the open-ended questions that we talk about, like we said, require people to elaborate a little bit more. They are not easy to respond to, and they should be asked slowly in order to give people time to reflect, which also means that you shouldn't be stacking your questions. And what I mean by that is you don't want to ask somebody on what would you do if this was the scenario And how would you tackle that? Because it's two separate questions there. And we call that stacking. And that is essentially asking those two questions, or sometimes we do three in a row, where we're like, oh, shoot, that was too many. And people think about the last question, they forget about what the first one is. So this needs to come with a little bit of practice where you find somebody who can help you with this and alert you when you might be stacking in those cases. Or if you accidentally do stack your questions, stop what you're doing, go up to the whiteboard or go up to, if you're sharing your screens, type in the question into chat, write the question down on the whiteboard, and write both of them down to say, I'm sorry, I realize I asked you two questions in a row. I'm just going to write these down here so I don't lose it. Let's start back with the first one and work from it that way. So make sure that you're asking them slow, you're asking them one at a time, and you're not making them too complicated. So when we ask these open-ended questions, we're really showing that we've got interest in what it is that we are talking about. It really makes it much more conversational. Like you say, less of an interrogation, feels more like that conversation. You're more curious in what it is that they have to talk about. It doesn't feel like you're just coming in to suck all the information about it. It's showing that you really care about the process, you really care about the person that you're working with, or the team that you're working with, to get the most out of what it is that they have to say. You care about, from a value add perspective, why this means something to them. So it helps from the curiosity aspect. Another way to look at this too from an open-ended question is these open-ended questions really naturally drive that dialogue because people start to build on one another when they start asking these questions, when it's an open-ended question. Because you hear somebody answer an open-ended question, they start elaborating more, they start having a discussion, and then it feels more like a conversation where other people start to jump in and pop around. That doesn't happen when you're asking the close-ended questions that are simply answered with a yes or a no. So when we do have these open-ended conversations, those feel less like an interrogation. Sometimes I was actually in an event, gosh, probably 10 or 15 years ago, that I was participating in, and it felt like we were all doing something wrong. It was like, why did you do things that way? And then, did you mean to do it in that way? And it was a yes or no question. There was no elaboration on it. So instead of asking, did you mean to do it that way? It could have be, walk me through your process, your thought process on how you got to that point. Yes or no versus I can explain how I got to this answer. It really felt like they didn't care what it was that we had to say when they were just asking us close-ended questions. It felt like they already had their mind made up and they were just kind of working through the process with us, asking these yes or no questions so that they could get where they needed to go. And we were just kind of a checkbox on their list. It didn't feel good. So you know you're asking really, really great open-ended questions when it does feel like much more of that conversation. Now, sometimes when we're answering these questions, what they're giving back to you is really great. You've got actionable detail that you can continue to build upon. And sometimes this is where it's hard as the leader or the facilitator because you're trying to listen to what it is that they are saying and they're coming back with all this great detail. You're trying to write it down as quick as you can, but you're also thinking about the next open-ended question you want to ask them. Resist the urge to constantly be thinking about what is the next question I have to ask. Really try and sit there and take in what it is that they have to say. The questions will come naturally as you go. Really focus on what it is and the content that they're saying. That's the value behind there. Listen to how they're saying it. Listen to what they're saying. Watch their body language when they're saying it. You can take a lot of information as to how they are answering these questions into consideration when you're thinking about what your next steps are in the process. Now, that invites people into that discussion. You have to listen to them as part of that discussion. You also have to create that environment where it feels safe and people can help build upon that information. So you can't be shooting it down, you can't be defending, you can't be explaining. And that's also something to resist as you're going through this as well, because some information will come out that you may know the answer to, you may have put that process in place on, or you may feel the urge to defend or explain. Resist that urge. You're asking people for their feedback. You're asking people for them to elaborate on their experience, whatever their perceptions are. It is not the right environment or appropriate at that point to start blaming, defending, explaining in those cases. They will shut down if you start to do that. So just completely be open. I joke quite often, one of my friends, he's a kindergarten teacher, he always taught me to close your mouth and ears up. He does this with his kindergartners all the time. And I try and remember this when I am facilitating with a group of people. I am there to close my mouth and my ears are up. I need to be listening in these cases so that I can help move the event forward in the correct way, or move that meeting or move that discussion forward in the right way. I'm taking in all that information so that we can drive the next set of questions. So let's take a look and see how this actually works. So this is an example of some open and closed-ended questions that I have actually experienced before. Before I really knew what I was doing, understanding these open and closed-ended questions, I fumbled through this sometimes when I was just not on my game. And this actually was an example that happened probably about 15 years ago. And I remember sitting there as a practitioner trying to run some of these events, being like, why are people just not talking? Like, why do I have to feel like it's pulling teeth to get this information out of people? So this was an actual real life example. So I had said, hey, what's the next step in the process? We're doing a good process map. And the person says, we send the invoice to accounts payables. And I say, is there anyone else involved in that step? And they say, no. So I'm like, all right, clearly I have to come up with the next question. All right, are there any pain points around that step? And they answer, yes. And I'm like, you kidding? Like, can you not tell me about them? Can you not give me more information? You just say yes. And I'll say to them, can you elaborate more on the pain that you're experiencing? And they're like, yes. And it was like, okay, so go, like, tell me what it is that you're dealing with. And it was really frustrating. It was tough for me as the facilitator. I knew it was tough for the participants at that point. We had somebody in there who really wasn't willing to talk about the process. They didn't want to be there. They didn't want to explain. They felt like they were being attacked and being pulled into this meeting as if they were doing something wrong. And the way that I was asking those questions in a closed-ended format just was not really great at getting more information out of the people. So a few ways that we could turn this around from an open-ended question. So what is the next step in the process would be the question that I would start with again. And they would say, same answer. We send the invoice to accounts payable. So then I would ask them, who is also involved in that step? They can't answer yes or no. They have to tell me who is. They could say nobody, or they could tell me who else is involved. So their answer was, well, we perform the task, but in order to do that, we need the information first from the business leader. So that is way more information than no. No. So now I know that, yes, that person performs that task, but they're doing it based on information that comes to them. And maybe I didn't even have that on the process map yet. So now I know that there's another person involved. That's information I didn't have before. Then, after we have that discussion, I might ask them another question on, okay, what kind of pain points did you experience in that step? Instead of asking, did you experience any pain? This is what type of pain? Talk to me about what it was that you were experiencing. And instead of answering yes or no, they're saying to me, we are often missing the W-9, which means it comes back to us and we have to set up the account, which in turn turns into delays in payments. That is way more information than yes. That tells me a lot more that I know that I need to work with. So in my mind, I'm sitting there going down, okay, we need to look at the W-9 process. We need to look at how long payments are delayed. That might be a good metric for us to measure this process on. We might need to look at the account setup process and when we're asking for that W-9 to come in. My wheels are just spinning at this point to being like, okay, there's all these different avenues that we can go down because I was just given a ton of great gold information there. And then in this example, this is funny because they actually reached out and continued to elaborate then because the conversation was continuing to go. They felt much safer to have a conversation. They said, hey, Austin, didn't you say something the other day about maybe collecting the W-9 in the contracting process? And that elaborated this whole conversation on possible ideas for continuous improvement. So in my head, as the facilitator, I was thinking about, yeah, maybe we need to move that W-9 process. If I would have said it out loud at that point, it would have been my idea and I would have owned it as the facilitator. But the participant brought it up at that point of, hey, maybe we could look at moving the W-9 into the process, into the contracting process. Then that puts the ownership on the participant. They came up with that idea. That's their idea. It's no longer mine as the facilitator. So we might be thinking it. We could ask some questions, kind of guiding them down that path to help them come up with those opportunities. But the actual ideas are coming from your participants or the people you're meeting with, or your team members or employees if you're the leader in that case. So, a really, really great example of how you can turn that stuff around. Now, how do we change some of these questions around? And I've just got a few examples here, and I can tell you how I learned how to practice some of this stuff. So, a closed example might be, have you investigated other options? That is a yes or no question. An open way to ask that question is, what options have you explored? Because that requires the person to elaborate on all of the different options instead of just a yes or no answer. And all we really did was change around that opening question. Instead of a have, we ended up putting in a what. So it requires somebody to answer more than just that yes or no. The next one is, do you think that that idea could work? And I catch myself on this one all the time. I'm like, do you think that idea could work? And they're like, yes. I'm like, oh, I just did it again. You can ask that question in a different way and say, what obstacles come up for you around that idea? Or you could change it around on the positive side that as well. We've talked about obstacles. What are the benefits of working on this idea? So then you can have both the pros and the cons, which will help you from a change management perspective, because then you know what you need to work on from a desire point of view and what you can use to help make sure that people want to follow this process moving forward. So asking people, hey, what obstacles do you think might come up with this? Then that's kind of answering that question of, do you think that idea could work? Because typically your next question would be like, where would it fall apart? So, what obstacles come up around that idea? You can just skip asking that first question. And then the last one that we have here as an example is there room for improvement? Well, yeah, there's always room for improvement. It's continuous improvement for a reason. Processes are not perfect from the start. They never will be. They might be perfect for a second, but then the world changes and things just continue to be modified over time. So, of course, the answer is going to be yes there. But I always like to ask the question is, how could this be better? And that way, when you're asking it, how could this be better? It's not as if you're thinking that there's doing something wrong. The process could be great how it exists today, but there's always room to make it better a little bit more than it was the day before. And I love that question. Always asking, how can you plus this up? How can we make this better? And that just changing that to an open ended question instead of is there room for improvement, which is just yes or no, it makes a huge difference. Now, this stuff doesn't come overnight. I had to remember how to change my way of thinking and how I was asking these questions coming out of my mouth. And there were two ways that I did this. One way is actually when I was doing my coaching training, my mentor coach, he would bust me on this stuff all the time. So if I asked a closed ended question, he would just answer with a yes or no, or he'd say redirect. And it would help me catch when I was doing it to the point that I would catch it before it even came out of my mouth or just as it came out of my mouth. And I would stop myself and I would say, let me rephrase that. And I would turn it into an open ended question. So he was really good at helping me with that. My husband is actually really good at that as well. So I told him, I said, hey, if I ask you close ended questions for the next like 2 months, I need you to tell me that I'm asking a close ended question. So of course he took that as a fun experience, point out when I was doing something wrong. So he was like, I'm on it. So every time I asked a close ended question, essentially for 2 months, he would tell me that I was asking a close ended question. And then he thought it would be fun to say redirect and tell me that I was doing it wrong. He was also really good at letting me know if I was stacking my questions to him, because that would help me catch as well so that I would stop stacking my questions. So I would recommend, if this is something that you want to do, tell somebody that you work with often and say, hey, I'm working on changing around my questions from close-ended questions to open-ended questions. If you hear me asking a question that is using closed verbiage like the do, have, is, can you help me by pointing that out so I can rephrase it into an open-ended question? And people are going to be really willing to help you out on this one. So find a trusted mentor, find somebody that you're working with. Maybe it's actually one of your employees or team members who can help you with this as well. Like I said, I enlisted my husband. I used my mentor coach. I actually used Jen, my business partner here. She helped me with this as well when she heard me asking some open or close-ended questions, or said, "Hey, that's a really good open-ended question. That was really good from the reinforcement perspective." Now, what I'd love to share with this is actually some of my favorite open-ended questions. And for all of you who signed up and registered for the webinar today, you are going to be getting a PDF of this when I send out the video of this later today. I have a PDF of this page and a PDF of the next page, which is my favorite open-ended questions that I use when I am working with teams. So some of my favorite open-ended questions here is, what part of the process are you most proud of? That is one of those things that I ask the first time when I go into meeting with a group and we are working on trying to figure out ways to improve it. If I ask that question on, tell me about what you're most proud of, like what part of it are you the most proud of? That usually tells me that that's something maybe that they want to keep and that's something that we can build upon. Maybe it's something we can learn from and I can understand why they're super proud of it and maybe how they got to that point to be so proud of it. So what's that gold I can work with based on whatever their answers are? I also like to ask them that if you could define the ideal state, what would it be? It's a really great conversation starter for them where it puts the answers on their responsibility, not mine. I don't have to have the answers in those cases. It's their responsibility to define what the ideal state is. And when those words come out of their mouths, that's gold for you to work with as well. Um, I like that what aren't we thinking of? What could throw us off track? I also like, and I can't remember if it's on the, oh, we are on this one. What are you just tolerating right now? That is one of my ultimate favorite questions to ask because that stuff that is teetering on, we are just tolerating it, typically is the indicator of what's going to turn into a big deal down the road. So I always like to ask that when everyone's like, oh, nope, those are the really, really big pain points. We got to focus on those. I always ask the follow up question then, what are you just tolerating? Because I know that that's what it is that we need to work on next. And we just need to keep our eyes and ears perked for when that stuff might actually hit. Some other questions you could ask are who could derail this? So, who do we need to watch out for? How do we get them on board with us? How could we reward employees for changing? Where could this break down? These are all really, really great questions that we can ask as part of these meetings to really understand more about the process. Now, if you're doing something specifically with change management, this is my list as it relates to change. So we've got a couple steps here, creating that case for change, dealing with resistance, understanding our influencers, enabling others, and measuring and maintaining the changes. These fall right in line with our ADKAR steps here. Our ADKAR change management, if you aren't familiar with that, is awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And I use these questions all the time when we are putting together change management plans. So, some of my favorite questions as it relates to this is what information do you need to know before you make a personal decision to support this change? I love this question because I can't get in their minds. I don't know what people are thinking as to why they might support this change or why they might not. I only know how I would feel if I was approaching that change. I like to ask that question because it helps me put myself in their shoes to be able to understand their thought process as to why this might be a good thing or a bad thing or what resistance we might be running into. Dealing with resistance, there's a lot of really great questions here. We could look at it. One of the days or one of the questions that I like to ask on that one is why would somebody be concerned about these changes instead of asking like what types of resistance, which is still a good question, but why would somebody be concerned with this? And it forces the participants to put themselves in other people's shoes to come up with reasons why people might be resistant. That is one of those questions that always seems to open up a ton of conversation, and there's some really great information that comes out of it. Then we talk within change management about understanding our influencers. Some good open-ended question as it relates to our influencers are who are the biggest supporters? Who do I need to bring with me to help me roll out this change or to help me roll out this process that can be my cheerleaders to help me with this? And then also help me understand who might be the biggest derailers, who are going to be the ones that are going to help could bring this down. because those are the people either I want to address right away or I want to keep an extra close eye on and better understand why they might be resistant to it. So, understanding who our influencers are and asking some really great open ended questions around that. Then, enabling others, this is where we're teaching other people how to do the process and what they need to know. What would you need to learn in order to be able to do this? Because I might understand it. I might know only need some simple training, or I might need to be walked through the process once or twice. But what would somebody else need to learn in order to be able to do this? Because maybe it's something that they're a little bit more unfamiliar with. So, how would you teach somebody else about those changes moving forward? Then, last but not least, the measuring and maintaining aspect of it. So, how could we reward employees for changing? What are some creative ways that we could look at that instead of, do you think employees would be motivated if we gave them rewards for changing? Yes. It's a lot better when we're asking those open ended questions and ideas of, okay, then what could we do? And what is the best environment for this to be able to work in so that we can better set ourselves up for success to give us an environment where that could work? So these are just a few of my favorite open-ended questions. Like I said, if you registered for the webinar, you'll be getting a copy of this PDF. If you aren't registered for it and you're just watching it back on YouTube, feel free to reach out to me, julie@jointpivot.com. Send me a message. Let me know that you're asking for the open-ended questions, and I will be happy to share the PDF of my questions with you. I'm always happy to share these if they help your process improvement events move a little bit smoother. So a few takeaways for today. Obviously, this is the same slide that I showed here at the beginning. So hopefully now you know when you're asking open-ended questions, how they can really be helpful in helping you get more impactful and actionable information because we're getting more than just a yes or no out of people. We're getting some really good information, getting good participation. We're making it flow like more of a conversation. We're interested, we're curious, we're asking more about how that process is working from their experience. And when it is their experience and they're the ones who are sharing their ideas, then it becomes theirs. It's not our ideas anymore, it's theirs. They own it. They're more likely to change in those cases. That gives us, as leaders, facilitators, process improvement people, change management, project management, strategic planning, whatever it is that we're doing, whatever role we're playing, we don't own it. It's the people who are following that process or who are running those projects. They are the ones who own that information because they came up with it, because we're asking those really, really great open ended questions. If you have any questions on this, obviously feel free to reach out to me. I am happy to talk with you on this stuff. Like I said, happy to provide the PDF with you as well of those open-ended questions that I like to ask. If you have more questions on this, you want to maybe practice, give me a call as well. I'm happy to help out with this. You can always reach out, julie@jointpivot.com, and I am happy to help out. Now, we do have another webinar coming up. Jen will be back for that one. She will be back here in September. I will be here with you as well. And we will be talking about using communication systems to drive engagement and impact the bottom line. So Jen is going to be coming in and giving you a great overview on how we communicate, what we say, what we don't say, what's the impact when we don't say that, to make sure that we're not sending mixed messages, we're not causing confusion, that we're giving clear, succinct information as we go. So Jen will be talking about those communication systems, how we use them to drive engagement, and how they contribute to our company's value every single day. So that is Monday, September 27th from 12 to 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. The link will actually be in the email that is coming out to you today with a recap of this, and I will also put this in the comments in YouTube as well if you need to register for that webinar. But we are so glad to have you join us here today. If you need to reach out, obviously, here's my contact information. Come find me at LinkedIn. I am happy to answer any questions that you have on using open-ended questions as it relates to process improvement, change management, strategic planning, any of those. These open-ended questions are always gold whenever you are meeting one-on-one with employees. Great for your customer meetings, really awesome when you're trying to do process improvement and change management, and even better when you're trying to dig strategic planning information out of leaders. So some magic out there for you. I cannot wait to see what it is that you guys are going to do with this. And I hope you guys all have a fantastic information. And thank you guys for joining me today. And I'll see you in September back with Jen when we talk about communications. Thanks, everyone. Have a good afternoon.